Okay, now try. Somebody was saying they couldn't hear you. We have an activity to get us started. I think it's always good to have a bit of reflection to understand where we came from. And so imagine yourself only at the level that you feel comfortable, but picture yourself as a 14-year-old adolescent. And using our poll function here, which I will open in just a minute, I'd like you to click on how much sexuality information did you get as a 14-year-old. Would you say you got a lot, got some, got hardly any at all, or you really got none? You can see that our poll is now open.
Oh, here, how much? All right.
Thank you, everyone, for selecting an answer. As you can see here, that lots of people got some sexual health information as a young person, thinking again that you were 14. But we also have some that got very little at all, and a few people who were not sure because they haven't yet voted. As we move forward, I want you to be thinking about sexuality as much more than sex. And for those of you who are working with families, this is something that's a really important topic, I think, to consider with the family or a client. Lots of times when we use this word sex, people think about sexual intercourse. And what we're talking about when we say sexuality is far more than the act of sexual intercourse. They really encompass a broad range of the human sexual and social milieu that impact what sexuality is. So you can see it's physical development, it's sexual behavior, it's gender, it's sexual expression, it's body image, language, reproduction, and so much more. And again, I think we want to also consider how this is impacted by people's culture, because culture, of course, plays a very significant role in how people view sexuality. One common way that we classify what sexuality is through the circles of sexuality. You can see that this has 5 components of it: sensuality, intimacy, sexualization, sexual identity, and sexual health and reproduction. And that last section, sexual health and reproduction, is really the area where many of us, when we think about what information we got, is the area where we got that information in. So while our young people are often telling us that they want to hear much more about the other 4 areas, intimacy, sensuality, sexualization, and sexual identity, much of the education that young people do get, both from home or in school or in community, really focuses on the plumbing aspect of it, more the sexual health and reproduction. That's not bad, and in fact, it's very, very important that young people get that information. But that being said, we also hear from adolescents and young people that they want to hear about those other areas. So I find that this circles of sexuality is quite useful in remembering the breadth that we really need to discuss with people. I have to say, though, that of all the kinds of descriptions, I really like Amy Shalet's description of sexuality. And she really describes it as an expression of an age-blind desire for meaningful intimacy and connection to others. And I think we can see that so much in terms of when we think about sexuality as a piece of our lives from birth until death. Obviously, this is really what we are reaching out for as people. And it can really help young people when we talk about it and think about it and approach it from this sexually positive way. We're going back to our polling now. And in this poll, I'd like you again put on that hat of a 14-year-old And I would like you to think about who or what at age 14 was your #1 health educator when, again, as a young person. You can see I have placed many, many options here. And so if you would please use your poll, we'll see where we got most of our information as 14-year-olds. Excellent. If you could make those last polls, then we'll close it. And as we do, I'd like you to pay a particular attention to our poll itself. As you can see, there are many, many options, and 1 or 2 people have selected at least one of the options, except for one thing that is very apparent here. If you look at our poll, we see that our healthcare providers, out of 40 people in the poll, no one selected healthcare providers. And I think that there's a lot more room to do better than that. And in fact, as we look at our slides going forward, we will see that young people actually are not getting information from healthcare providers, even though they will say that they believe a healthcare provider would be a credible source. So where do teens get their information? And where do young people get their information? Not unlike our poll. We see that parents play a pivotal role. In our poll in particular, we note that mothers or moms were very important. And whether you gave this poll a decade ago or now, that would be very much the same. Internet, of course, has given us a lot of opportunities to get information. And about half of all the young people that were polled in this study here that's cited on the bottom of our screen, about half of them said that they had looked up health information. And again, young people's health behavior is not much different than adults. And in fact, they may be more aggressive about this particular issue looking through media. The one challenge that we have in particular with media is that there's an awful lot of misinformation or inaccurate information. And if you don't have a lot of background information to start with, it's really hard for a young person to decipher whether what they're reading is accurate or not. Also, very significantly, if you see that last note under the media piece, porn is a significant source of information for youth 12 and over. And of course, in my humble opinion, this is not where we want young people to be getting their information from. But if we don't speak up, young people will seek information wherever they can get it. And in this case, we know that this is a source for particularly our younger teens. That being said, peers are also an important source of information, and not unlike our poll here, you can see that about 20% of parents our mothers were a source of information, and about 40% of those who answered our poll mentioned that peers were a source of information. So one of the great things we can do is make sure that we inoculate young people with really good information, because they do in turn around and talk to their peers. This last bullet point is very important, because as I noted earlier, our poll said that nobody in our poll had actually gotten information from their healthcare providers. And I have to say, unfortunately, this is not unusual. About 70% of male teens and about 79% of female teens report talking with a parent, which is wonderful, but they do not report talking to a provider. And so I think we can do much, much better than that. As I was saying there, healthcare providers are the least likely source of sexual information for teens. And we've had several different kinds of literature come out on this through the years. But I think that it pretty much repeats itself year after year. And as we get more comfortable with sexuality, I think we can reverse this trend. And I'm hoping and thankful that you're here on this webinar as part of your journey in getting more comfortable talking about sexuality and knowing pieces about it. So healthcare providers, as I said, are the least likely source, but instead of looking at it as a oh no kind of a thing, I think it really bodes itself as a true opportunity. Even though healthcare providers have limited time, they are seen as highly, highly reputable by young people. So if you can get your counseling staff, your medical staff, and other physicians and healthcare providers, your nursing staff, to get comfortable with this, and I'm so happy that we have so many home visiting nurses on here because you have the excellent opportunity to have the person in their home, in their environment, and on their territory, that their comfort level may be higher as well, talking about that. So if you're able to bring it up, these sexual health topics will get discussed. And I think it just bodes as a great opportunity for those conversations to occur. So why do we want to talk about this? Well, first of all, obviously, it demonstrates, if you bring this up, that you are an askable adult. You're someone who is ready to answer their questions and to listen to their concerns, and that you can relate to their situation. And of course, if we don't ask, a lot of times they won't tell. And if they don't tell, 3 to 4 months later, you find yourself asking, how come they didn't tell me that? And then you ask yourself, actually, I might have forgotten to ask. And so if we do ask, we know that young people do actually respond to our sexual health questions, and it will alert you to any issues that may need to be addressed. And so it's a very important topic, as I already mentioned, to broach. The other place is, of course, if you broach these topics, it's a way of letting the young person know that what they're doing is a healthy part of their lives, or if in fact it's not, you can have a discussion about that. One of the ways that we can then, of course, improve how this is happening and improve our outcomes with young people is to have these discussions with young people about what is healthy sexual development. And if you know, you'll be more comfortable having those discussions with young people. This is this is a very detailed slide, and I understand it's a bit hard to see. But what I think is mostly important, and I'm certainly not going to read each one of the bullet points, there is a reference on the bottom, and I would direct you towards that reference for a very good web-based chart that you can download as well. But what I think is, again, very, very important is to look at these developmental categories and recognize that there are many sexual health behaviors that are very common, and that there are things you can do to encourage healthy sexual development. Again, looking, for instance, in our birth to 2 years, there's a lot of curiosity. And of course, a toddler has curiosity, a birth to 2-year-old child has curiosity about all things, from watching a small object move to listening to things, and they have very little, if any, inhibitions. And so knowing that is really important. One of the things that I find when I'm working with parents and with medical pediatric residents is that a lot of times we base our thinking about a birth to 10-year-old, what their perspective should be, is really based on an adult lens. And I think one of the best things we can do is think back. Obviously, we're not going to remember when we're an infant, but to think through this from the lens of an infant or of a toddler, and remembering that it's totally normal, it's healthy sexual development, that a 2-year-old wouldn't have a lot of inhibitions. And we've all seen that play out as a young person runs around the front yard on a nice summer day with no clothes on, no diaper on, and they're happy as can be. And that's normal. This is a time in this birth to 2 infancy where we have excellent opportunities to weave those pathways to strong language that is helpful and healthy to young people. So naming things what they really are named. If the language in which you're working has the terms and the words, we want to name those body parts what they are. One of the greatest strengths of that is if there is ever an issue, such as sexual abuse or sexual violence, if a young person says, someone touched my penis, there isn't a question about what happened. If a young person says, someone touched my flower, we're not exactly sure what that means. And we're really empowering young people by teaching the language that they can use that adults can recognize. Because a lot of times the code names that we teach young people are not code words outside of the family. And so a caring professional, such as a preschool teacher, may not recognize that a young person is actually reporting on something that needs to be addressed. So in this age range, encouraging those you work with as parents to talk to young people about or to use proper language and to practice that language themselves. I mean, the best part about being a parent to a 2-year-old or a baby, for that matter, is when they reach down and they touch themselves in a diaper change, and you know it's not dirty or anything. So you're not worrying about that part, but you know it feels good. And instead of saying, "Oh no, don't touch that," we say, "Yeah, that feels good." And if you're not used to using those words like penis or vagina, you can practice to a newborn and say penis, penis, penis a whole bunch of times, and the baby just smiles at you and it feels so good. And so you can have all that good interaction at a very early age, and you are wiring pathways to discussion that will lead you through a lifetime of connection with young people. Looking at those early childhood years, again, a very detailed list here. But this is occasionally a time, this is when I hear a lot of concern from parents about what young people are doing. And a lot of, again, adult lenses placed on young people here. So this is the time where young people start to think about perhaps playing house. They play house, they play Superman, and they may play what we term in English language as playing doctor. Or basically, if you show me your body parts, I'll show you mine. I can't tell you how many parents are very, very worried about that. That's, again, a very, very normal and healthy behavior. One of the things that young people will do is they're just plain curious. This isn't sexually driven. They want to see what's underneath the pants, you know, or underneath the dress or whatever it may be, because it's covered up. They're little scientists. They're just wondering. It's also a time when they may, when young people may show curiosity about where did babies come from. I've seen so many parents get all nervous. Oh no, I'm going to have to tell them about sex. This is my big sexual intercourse talk. And of course, from 2 to 5, young people are not asking about how do you have sexual intercourse. That is not the question. They want to know, did I come from my mother? Did I come from my father? Where is it that I came from? Or they might actually be wondering, they heard their friend was from New York, and they wanted to know if they were also from New York. So a really good thing to do here is to not think about delving into, well, this is how you have sex, and this is how I got pregnant, or you know, your mom got pregnant, or whatever it may be. This is really a very basic lesson about young persons. You know, young persons may be asking, hey, where did I come from? And it's, you know, you came out of a mother's uterus. And often what's very interesting is a real basic answer like that is followed by like a thanks or a nothing, and they go off and play. So again, don't look at it from a lens of an adult's eyes, but of the 2 to 5-year-old. You also may see in this age range that slang names come, and there's a sort of interest or ongoing interest in bodily functions. Again, very normal. But in terms of that slang term, I would go back to what I said from birth to 2. It's an opportunity to call the body parts what they're called, to explain very basic anatomy. Babies do not grow in tummies because food goes in tummies, right, or stomachs. So we want to be clear that babies grow in uteruses and food goes into the stomach. Those kinds of basic anatomy things are appropriate at this age. This is also a really important time to talk about boundaries, when things are, what your family's values are, and it's also a really important time for you to practice and think about what are my family's values around these issues. And there's so many times that we think about values around other things, but it's an opportunity for you to think about, what are my values around sexuality? And how do I want to convey those? And at times we may have very complex values around those, and we might be saying them to a 5-year-old that may not fully embrace that at that moment, but they keep hearing those values through the years. And as they grow and have greater understanding, they can also embrace it. But they, again, have heard it early and often. When we're looking at that middle childhood years, again, things like potty humor, jokes, we've all seen this continue to occur. Again, this is normal or common behavior. Sex play, touching their bodies, finding out about their bodies. It feels good when I go over a hill and my vulva gets tickled. There may be masturbation that occurs. Again, this is all part of normal sexual health development in a young person. And we want to continue having conversations as a young person leads us along. Now, I should say, too, that there are young people that would never actually ask a sexual health question. It may just not be in their nature. And so I do think for those where there are young children who aren't actually asking questions, there are so many opportunities in our environment to talk about things that I would bring them up, again, at their level, not necessarily through an adult lens. There's also, by the time a child is 7 and 8 years old, there's also a lot of adult kinds of things that they see, whether it's the models in the Victoria's Secret window or a television show with a complex sexualized plot line. These sometimes need interpretation by adults, and thinking again about what to say and how to say ahead of time is often helpful. Well, you may not know the content that you're going to be addressing. You may, having the sense that you will address it and feeling comfortable by having maybe some practice in advance and knowing that these questions are normal behavior for a young person can really make the whole situation much more comfortable and open that ongoing dialogue. I also want to note that any pubertal development at 8 or younger is considered precocious, but it's only up to 8, 9 and over, and we do not consider that precocious or early puberty development. And so it's really also very important that you're laying this groundwork early for even just the most basic pubertal talks such as menstruation, because we've seen an awful lot of young people have their periods earlier and earlier. The final thing that I think is so important on this slide is really talking about personal rights. A middle childhood aged youth here between the ages of 5 and 8 can certainly understand that your body belongs to them and that brings both rights and responsibility, and that we need to treat people with respect around these issues. Moving on to the later childhood, again, now we enter the area of pubertal development, and again, that often takes front and center stage. This is the time where we hear lots of parents who are engaged with their young people talking about the changes that they're going through, and some of those changes become very physically obvious. There are a lot of social norming things that happen around these, and again, masturbation is a topic that comes up. And like we have said before, we are sexual human beings from birth to death, and masturbation is one of those things that goes with it. This is a time when young people may be very curious about adult bodies. They may be looking at TV or other websites and magazines in order to get sexual content information. However, if they have an askable adult, whether it be their parent or somebody else, they are, as we saw earlier, very likely to come to them if they know it's okay. This is also a time when relationships may occur. They may be talking about a girl may be talking about having a girlfriend or a boyfriend, and a boy, same thing, may be talking about having a boyfriend or a girlfriend. These relationships are pretty simple in terms of it may be they don't even talk to each other, but someone told someone that they liked each other. It's all, again, very normal, and sometimes young people get there before their parents or their connected adult with whom they they interact most often, is ready. But again, if we're aware of these situations and know that this is normal, they're moving along on the path that they should, it sometimes makes the whole transition just all that much easier, and actually for parents kind of exciting. So I talked about when there are what healthy development looks like. It's also really important to talk about when we should have a concern. And there are some really basic rules around this. I'm sure you can think of perhaps some things that aren't listed here as well, but the two basic rules that I think are easy to remember is that when it hurts the child, or when they're hurting someone else, or they're hurting themselves, that basic rule is really an important one to pay attention to. So the sexual behavior should not be aggressive towards themselves or others, and it shouldn't cause any emotional or physical harm. If we see those things happening, for an example, when it's not between same age or similar age young people, a 12-year-old playing doctor with a 4-year-old is not normal sexual health development. And so again, that could be hurting. That's obviously a potential issue of hurting and causing emotional harm, and so we would consider that not age-appropriate or normal sexual health development. Or when a child continues the sexual behavior even after appropriate limits have been set. And I think this is really important to say that there's going to be times with young people when you have to tell them more than once because they're young people. I mean, adults have to be told more than once sometimes, but there are limits that we need to set. So things like, it's okay to touch your penis, but it sometimes isn't, this is something that we have to do in private. And reinforcing that with a young child, it would be normal if they grasp that. So the touching is not an unusual event, as I've mentioned earlier. But if the child continued to do that even after clear boundaries and clear discussions have been set, that would be something to reach out and get additional help from. So I have touched on some of the kinds of questions that young people have as we looked at the normal sexual health development of young people. But I also wanted to pose a few typical questions that I myself have been asked several times through education, and give you some ideas of how you might answer that. Or if it's something that you may actually never answer, it may be helpful just to be able to anticipate the kinds of questions that some people hear. So if Kai's an infant and always smiles when he touches his penis while I'm changing him, what should I do? My answer to that is be happy that your young child, your infant in this case, is experiencing sexual pleasure in a very safe and positive way. And what you should do is smile and say, that feels good, doesn't it? And as that child progresses, you'll be talking about the boundaries that we talked about earlier. But at this point, a very young child looks in your eyes, sees you encouraging and showing that that's okay, that you're not going to slap away the hand. Of course, if it were dirty, that might be something different. But you're not making a face, or even more importantly, saying nothing at all. That sends a very strong message as well. So smile, say it, touching it feels good. We do that in private. This is a private place, and practice your language around that. Another question I ask all the time is it okay for my children to bathe with one another? And I think it's okay for children to bathe with one another as long as they're okay with it. And the greatest thing about young people is when they're not okay with it, they let you know very soon. And so as long as you're comfortable with it and your children are comfortable with it, it's fine. And there's just this sort of natural time when they suddenly just stop doing it. And a lot of times, if you feel like it's going on too long, the size of the bathtub will limit it too. So there's just some practical things about that. So yes, it's okay for children to bathe with one another, and it just sometimes for parents makes things all that much easier. I want to teach her the correct names for body parts, but what if she yells them out in the grocery store? Children will do whatever you don't want them to do in terms of language. So they might yell out penis in the grocery store. If that's your concern, you should brace for it. It probably will happen. But you know what? I would rather have them know that word and have them yell it out in the grocery store once than not know that word at all. And by letting them you call it out and saying, actually, that's a word that we use more quietly. This is the body part we're talking about. You know, having a conversation around it rather than not letting them know that word at all is far better. So go ahead. It's your job to work the comfort area of it. It's that young person's job to learn that language so that as they grow, they can talk about their body in a healthy and natural way. As I always say when I'm talking to young people, a lot of them have learned that there's a problem down there. They'll talk about down there. And I always say, that's a long way from up here, and I'm not sure what you're talking about. So let's be clear about that. All right, again, thinking about some more questions from birth to 4. Where do babies come from? We already touched on this. I mentioned, again, using actual language and talking about it coming from the uterus. And this is not a time to be talking about penis and vagina sex. That'll come later, and a young person will ask you again and ask you for more detail, usually. And also, as we noted earlier, this is a time for a lot of toiling questions. Why do girls sit down? Why do boys stand up? And again, this is a time when they may notice this because young people are just starting to change if they're like, for instance, if they are in a daycare situation where they may see the standing up and sitting down transitioning for those boys. It's an opportunity just to have an honest answer. Say, you know what, a boy sits down when he poops because it's just easier, and a girl sits down when she poops and pees because it's easier, because it is. Again, young people just want straightforward and easy answers. Looking at 5 to 8-year-olds, questions that have commonly come up from people. Differences in family configurations. What does it mean to have 2 moms? Why does he have 2 daddies? Those kinds of things. Again, these aren't about asking about how they have sex or any of that. It's really just thinking about families, and my family is different than yours. Very, very common and a great opportunity to talk about families. This is also another time when many young kids will say that they want to marry their mom or their dad. They'll be telling you they want to live with you for the rest of their life. And again, as we know, most young people actually develop out of that. And by the time they're 14, they will not be telling you they want to live with you forever. That might not be as healthy. How does the baby get out? So at first they wanted to know where did they come from. Then they do want to know how they got out. So at this age, again, you're going to tell them this is a plumbing question. How did they get out? You tell them how they came out, whether they came out in terms of they were a C-section, a cesarean section baby, or if they were birthed through the vagina. It's just a plumbing question. Answer it straight up, and a lot of times you'll get a very, very okay and a move on. They will be back later on. Often at 5 or 6, they may want to know how they got out. At 9 or 10, they may want to know how they got in. Probably more like 8 or 9, they want to know how they got in. And so again, that'll be an opportunity where it does get more sexual in nature in terms of sexual intercourse, but it doesn't have to be a long, drawn-out conversation. Penis and vagina, penis goes inside a vagina, it releases sperm, sperm meets egg, and a baby grows. Very simple. And there's lots of books, too, that can help you with this. They also, at this time, may be very interested in getting big reactions. They have figured out that there are bad words, and that if I say this word, what happens? And that, again, it's just normal development. They may say it more than once, and they may see the more excited you get, the more often they may say it. So thinking about how to help parents or help your clients temper their reaction to some of these words. And of course, they're only saying words that they've heard. So if parents don't want them to be using those words, they probably shouldn't be using them themselves. As we move through the age groups, looking at 9 to 12-year-olds, this issue again of puberty development is a really important aspect of it. There will be a lot of questions around when will this happen to me? How do I know about this? Am I ready? So lots of puberty questions. One that often comes up too is some questions around when can they date, when can they have relationships, things like that. And it's not that a 9-year-old is ready to have an ongoing relationship. It's just that they're checking out what are your values around this. So if you're working with parents to asking them, so what's your answer going to be around this? And at 9 to 12, the stakes are pretty low because it's very unlikely they're actually going to be going out with anyone at that time. But it's an opportunity to have parents get ready for these years to come. Also, of course, important question is what's pornography, and exploring this as well with the young person and how you want to present that is really important. I don't think that there's a pat answer that everyone wants to give the same around that, but I think it's really worthy of thinking about it because as we saw before, 12-year-olds often do find their ways to information through pornography, or they are subjected to it even if they didn't want to because they accidentally click on it or have a friend who finds it. But above all these issues, the main question that a 9 to 12-year-old, a prepubescent young person is really thinking about and carries this through to the middle or middle school kinds of years is, am I normal? And as much as you can say, answering questions followed by that's a really healthy question or that's a totally normal thing for a young person to have or do or say is a very reassuring kind of thing for a young person to hear from an adult. By saying, you know what, I'm so glad you asked me that question, that's totally normal for you or totally normal for someone your age, is a way to tell a young person you're an askable adult, and it invites them back on many, many occasions. It also helps them calm down a little bit around these issues, which is again, very sexually healthy. The questions, of course, as they age get more complex from 13 to 18-year-olds. The questions are much more relationship-oriented, and it's an opportunity to move way beyond the plumbing. Hopefully you've been having, as a young person develops, we have had more conversations beyond plumbing, as I said earlier. But these are the kinds of questions that often come up that I've experienced working with young people. Things about what does that orgasm feel like, or when is it the right time to have sex? How do I know if I'm gay? How do I know if that person has an STI, or where do I get birth control? Those can be really difficult questions to answer, and or not so hard if you think about them ahead of time. But the part about this is again, just like in the earlier 9 to 12-year-old range, what we're really working on is saying, I'm an askable adult, come to me. Or if you're not that person, you've identified somebody else, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But again, what does that orgasm feel like? It's worthy of thinking about how you might answer this. I like to say an answer that has satisfied young people that I have used and got from a colleague of mine was that it's a really strong and often really good feeling, a feeling that maybe is hard to come by other ways. You may have, if you ever touched yourself, had this feeling. And it's a healthy, normal thing for your body to do. It's a natural sort of happy expression. And to give it some kind of context, I often say, it's kind of like when you have to hold something really, really tight, whether you have to go to the bathroom really bad and you had to hold it for a long time, or you had to squeeze really tight for something else, and then you let it go, and there's this tremendous sense of relief. Now, it's really hard otherwise for me to explain it, so that's the kind of explanation that I have used. So again, normalizing it, saying where they might have felt it, and here's where you might imagine what this feels like if you're asking and you don't know. When is the right time to have sex is a very complex question. I have met 13-year-olds who are more like 18-year-olds and 18-year-olds who are more like 13-year-olds. I personally think that when we look at research, there isn't a lot of healthy sexuality in terms of sexual intercourse that goes on for 13 and 14-year-olds. A lot of times the power and control issues are so strong in those age ranges that it's very hard to negotiate a healthy sexual relationship. Beyond that, I have actually seen some very healthy sexual relationships with in 15-year-olds and beyond. So answering that question again is perhaps about a value in a family. It's perhaps about the developmental age of that young person, and it's right time, right place kind of question. So the wonderful part about that is that there isn't an easy, like, this is the time. There are those kinds of things that you can think about in terms of answering it. And again, if you're not the person to answer that question, thinking about who could or who that young person could have that conversation with is also very important. I've been asked many times, how do I know if I'm gay? again, this is a lot like the one above. It's a challenging question in the sense that young people should and can and do explore the full range of sexual expression. It's very, very normal. And so again, I think going back to, well, if a young person has a good gut sense, what is your gut telling you? How would you feel if you were attracted to the same-sex persons? How would you feel if you're attracted to opposite? Or how would you feel if you're attracted to both? And having those conversations, and again, letting them know wherever they are in their journey is okay, is a really important piece about that. If there's opportunities to talk to other people about that as well, that can often be very comforting. Behind that question as often is this normal. How do I know if someone has an STI? This one is a little bit easier in that the only way to know about some STIs is to be tested, and some STIs don't actually have any kinds of symptoms. So this is much more of that basic sort of plumbing kind of question, and encouraging connection to healthcare is what I'm really after when I have this question. That it's your responsibility to connect to healthcare if you are thinking that somebody may be exposed, or you're thinking about having sex. It's a great opportunity to find out about different kinds of STIs, and you may not know because some of the STIs are so silent. And then where can I get birth control? And we'll, in a few minutes, look at some of those resources. But before we go there, I just want to bring up this word birth control. It's a word that we have tested in some of our research, and I've been caught off guard myself as a health educator with it. To many young people, the word birth control does not mean the full spectrum of contraceptives that are available. To them, it often means that either pills or pills and depot and condoms. So if a young person asks about birth control, I really encourage anyone who's having these conversations to think about asking them, when you ask about birth control, what are you talking about? And if they are talking about some kind of pills, condoms, or depot, to remind them that there's actually much more than that available, and we are very much encouraging it in our field to be talking about long-acting contraceptions. And so, of course, depot would fall into that, so would our things like IUDs. And so just check on that word. The other thing I also want to remind people is, well, pulling out, which is a common question also, is it okay to pull out, is an important form of birth control. And while it's certainly not what I would recommend as an ongoing method and a very effective method, by golly, it's better than nothing. So rather than poo-pooing some of those methods like that, to say, I'm so glad you asked me about that, pulling out is a method of birth control, and for some people who are really good at using it, they can use it effectively, but most people need something more than that. And so I'm so glad you asked me. Let me help you find out some other methods. And when you get this question, I want to remind you that it's the opportunity to do something, to take action about that, because we know on average a young person waits about a year from the time that they initiate intercourse to the time that they get on a reliable form of birth control. That's a really long time. And if we can shorten that by acting when they ask and being very positive about them asking, we can shorten that interval in which they have an opportunity to have an unplanned pregnancy. So when you get these kind of questions, these more complex questions, I think the best thing to do is always start by saying, I'm so glad you asked me that, or I'm happy you asked me that. If it's someone that you can answer the question for, then go ahead and ask, and include values as well if it's appropriate. So you might want to say, well, what do you think about that? What is the best age for you? What do you think? What are your family values? But if you're in an opportunity, if you have an opportunity to share your own values and it's appropriate within your setting, I think it's also appropriate to include those. You want to own those values. So in the sense, it might be something about when's the right age to have sex. Well, in our family, blank, and I'm so glad you asked me that. My value around this is blank. If it's a client situation, well, what do you think is the best age for you? Why do you think that? What would your parent, grandma, auntie, whoever say about that? Your religious leaders, how does that fit with religion? At this age, when they're asking these questions, they have pretty complex ways of sorting out things as well, just as adults do. And so inserting those values and those thought questions can really help them sort out what is right for them. There's also times when you're asked questions and you just simply don't know the answer. That comes up quite a bit. And inviting the young person to say, you know, I don't know the answer to that either. Again, I'm so glad you asked me that. It's going to help me learn something today, too. Why don't we both look it up together, or why don't we both look it up and compare? Invite that young person into finding the answer as well, and then helps by encouraging them to check in with you to make sure that the information that they got was correct information. Above all, because of course we can't anticipate every question or every situation, we can anticipate that young people want us to listen to them. So above all, after all we've heard and talked about today, we want to really encourage, I really want to encourage you to listen to young people. They want to be heard. Survey after survey, time after time, that's what they say. I just want to be heard. They also want honest information, and they want us to answer their questions if at all possible. So skirting it, saying, go ask your aunt, that's a good question for somebody else, is really telling that young person that you're not an askable adult. So be honest, and if you even can't answer the question, model some way of answering it like I did in the last slide. I already mentioned many times, if it's appropriate, please share values that go along with these questions. Young people have reported time and again that they want to hear values along with the facts, if it's appropriate in your role. You want to acknowledge their feelings and talk about relationships and relationship negotiation. So much of our information, as I noted at the beginning of this talk, is really focused on the plumbing. And well, young people need to know that information, and it's important information. They also need to and want to talk about relationships and feelings. And they feel a lot of times that that part of it gets shortened in maybe the classroom, or isn't actually broached at all. You also want to be able to provide them with resources, both human or in-person kinds of resources and internet resources that have reputable information for them. So if you're not able, if they're not able to come to you, that they are able to go somewhere else. I have said many times to parents when I'm doing parent education that they should talk to the young person about, is there anyone else that they would be okay with them asking a question if they didn't want to come to them, come to the parent themselves. Can you talk about that? Can you designate that person? And can you let that person know that you've designated them? So in our family, I have a good friend, and I always say, if you can't ask me a question, I want you to go to my friend. And my children know this person really well. Then, of course, one of the most difficult things is when we have patients or clients that are hard to connect with. They're not always there when we go to see them. They just called you and said that they would be there in 10 minutes when you arrive, and you show up and they're not there. Those are hard times to stay connected, but those are the young people that need us the most and the families that need us the most. So trying to stay involved and keep showing up time after time. Often that act of showing up is the greatest boost of trust that you can give a young person. And they will finally come to trust you, even if they let you down by not always being there when you show up. So stay involved and keep showing up. We have just a few minutes here, and I have placed on these slides a long list of many sources, and these slides are available to you as well. I just want to highlight a couple. As you can see on the left-hand side, there are many clinics in the, we are talking in the metropolitan area of Minneapolis and St. Paul, Minnesota. So if you're calling in from those areas, there are many clinics in this area that are focused on adolescent sexual health and are very, very competent to answer these kinds of questions, both for clients themselves or for other people seeking information for clients. We also have a very strong family planning and STD hotline that is available, and of course they take texts as well. So it's a great resource. On the other side are internet resources for people, and I wanted to point out too that regardless of where you are calling in the nation, your extension resources are often very strong, and all states have some form of extension, or if you can't grab your own extension resources, those of other states are very, very good sources of information. I've also placed on there some great resources for young people where they can get straight up information. I wanted to note on the very bottom of this is a very particular kind of information where it helps young people navigate telling their parent that they're pregnant. That's the Mom, Dad, I'm Pregnant resource that you'll see at the second to the bottom. Again, these are highlighted resources. These are specific to youth where they can go and get various information and navigate questions around sexual health. So I keep these handy for when you're working with teens. The summary for our conversation today is that if you're able to reach out and talk to people, and talk to young people, you are building a foundation that can last for their lifetime. Those early and often conversations say to young people you're an askable adult and that it's never too late to come and talk to you. So whether you're a parent or a provider, your opportunity to talk to a young person, whether they're a toddler or 10 or 18, are always opportunities to send positive messages about their sexuality, and also send a message that there are people there that are there to help them and to talk with them and to help them navigate the world of developing healthily as a sexual human being. I want to thank you for coming to this webinar today. If there are any questions, I invite you to now raise them. I do want you to note that before leaving, we do have an evaluation, which I would very much appreciate that you fill out. My contact information is on the bottom here, so should you have a follow-up question later, I would invite you to use either of those ways to connect to us. All right, is there anyone with any questions? If you unmute your phone, you can go ahead and raise a question. You can unmute by pressing #6. Someone asked about, can I talk about the experience of trauma on healthy sexual development? Well, I think that any trauma, depending on when it happens, can interfere with that healthy sexual development. And again, if there's known trauma, I think that it's important that that gets addressed in a therapeutic manner. The good part is that there's lots of ways to address that in a healthy way. Probably the worst part about it is two things. We don't want to keep re-victimizing someone. So if that has been addressed, if a young person is telling you that this has been addressed, you don't necessarily need to go down the road of trying to readdress it. If it's never been addressed and it's a trauma that needs reporting and you're a mandated reporter, then of course we need to go down that route. And your county social work contacts will be helpful in in understanding what needs to be reported and what does not. But as I think we often know, trauma can stop us in our tracks, and it can leave us sort of stunted in that particular area. So if there is a trauma and it's identified, one of the healthiest things we can do is help a young person navigate more professional help to look at that, identify it, and move forward. But the other upside of it is that it's just because a person has experienced trauma doesn't mean that they have to live that trauma their whole life. I do think, though, that it's important for providers to recognize this. I think that this issue of trauma-informed care is getting more and more attention, and I believe that probably as visiting nurses and other health professionals, there's opportunities to learn more about trauma-informed care through webinars and other professional development, and I would encourage you to do that as well. Someone had asked if we were going to share the slides. We do have the participant list, so those could be sent out again.
Right. We'll send them out when we send out the link, because this is recorded, and you can pass that along and share it with others.
And I want to encourage everybody can see this link to the evaluation, so do use that to evaluate the webinar today. What other questions do people have? I don't see any additional questions, so at this time I'd like to thank you all for coming to the webinar today and for thinking about how we can develop and encourage normal, healthy sexual development in young people. It's such an exciting time for young people, and our involvement in it can help them navigate the waters of development in the best way possible. And I appreciate all the work that all of you do to make that happen. Thank you for coming today.
Thank you, Giselle.